Los conceptos vertidos en este espacio son de exclusiva responsabilidad de la persona o institución que los emite.
Ahora empieza su programa, El Show del Dr. Roy Aranda. Temas sobre los efectos que tiene la separación de los niños de sus padres, traumas que afrontan los indocumentados, violencia doméstica, el porqué de la violencia en las escuelas. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Good evening, Tribuna TV viewers. Here we are again. This is my 18th show. Who's keeping record? Next week will be the 19th as I celebrate my one-year anniversary. And it's been a long year, gratifying for me, and I hope that the Good evening, Tribuna TV viewers. Here we are again. This is my 18th show. Who's keeping record? Next week will be the 19th as I celebrate my one-year anniversary. And it's been a long year, gratifying for me, and I hope that the worth their while and equally gratifying. Today we have a very interesting and a very hot topic. I'm reasonably comfortable in saying that it's probably one of the 2 or 3 most dominant topics that's taking place in the entire country. So I did want to bring that out to the open. The topic today is called the immigration crisis, the journey so far, and we will be covering all sorts of immigration-related issues that are, troublesome and difficult, and clearly solutions are needed. I don't necessarily have the answers, but I hope that you get some sense of what the scope of the issues are that we are looking at. We have problems that include country of origin. Why is it that an immigrant so desperately wants to leave, seeking refuge in the United States? What are some of the difficulties that we're encountering here at the border? We've all seen images and have heard problems from detention at the border. What are some of these consequences? Children being separated from their families, and of course the devastation, the horror earlier this month about the El Paso mass shooting that took so many lives. And only a few days later we had mass ICE raids in Mississippi, and of course all of this has left many Hispanic immigrants, even those who actually are lawfully in the United States, who have permission to be here, have left them very, very worried and very concerned. Regrettably, last month, we only had one show. Normally, I've been doing this show twice a month now. One of the shows, you'll recall, was pertaining to 9/11, and it had to be canceled, but I'm very, very glad to state that next week, the show, which is entitled Remembering 9/11, Let's Not Turn a Blind Eye, we'll have that show. That'll be my 19th and actually one-year anniversary of my having done the TV show. And the guest that day will be the retired Captain Terrence Ravella, who's a World Trade Center disaster survivor. I was intimately involved with him during 9/11. I visited Ground Zero on many occasions with him, and we had a number of adventures together. And as you are aware from recent news reports. Okay, I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know. But you'll recall that there were all of these questions that were being raised and concerns that were being made about victims from the 9/11 survivors and rescue workers who are becoming sick, and to what extent their needs were being taken care of or not. So we're going to be discussing that at length next week. And certainly August 29th is pretty close to September 11th. It'll be the 18th anniversary of 9/11, and I think it's very important for us to remember and to take into consideration when we have such important events. So I'm looking forward and hope that you'll all join me next week for that show along with Captain Terrence Ravella. So tonight I have a wonderful special guest, Dr. Lucy S. Takagi. And I know her for several years. She's a psychologist. I know her through the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, Rutgers University. Hi there. And truth be told, I'm older than she is, so I actually graduated many, many more years than she did. But I was very impressed with her when I met her online, when I met her through the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology listserv. I remember how active she was, and I said to myself, boy, she's on the ball. She knows her stuff. And we had a number of interactions. I think you invited me to do some mentoring and things like that. And I probably went out to Rutgers a couple of times to do some presentations and programs. And through the years, we've stayed in touch. She has graduated a long time ago. She was, you were president of the Alumni Association, I think,
Correct.
Right, at one occasion. So I almost competed with you because I was vice president of the Alumni Association, but I started at GASEP in its second year of existence, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of how far back I go. And I'm delighted also to let you know that Lucy is president-elect of New Jersey Psychological Association. I was very connected with New Jersey Psych Association for some years through Jeff Singer and a couple of others, and I actually attended many meetings. And when I went to school there, New Jersey was my second home. So I'm very fond of New Jersey, and I have very fond memories of GASEP and all the places that I studied at. So
you also did a wonderful presentation at the Morris County Psychological Association.
Oh, you remember that?
I remember that.
Okay, yeah, it was. I've done so many presentations. Yeah,
the hostess in this show.
Yeah, I've done. My passion for a long time has been to work with victims of violence, victims of domestic violence, and also victims of immigration-related kinds of issues, and people basically who get beaten up, who are bullied, who are taken advantage of by a system that some people overpower the others, and they are disenfranchised, unempowered. And for at least 30 years or more, I've always tried to reach out to them, offer a helping hand, and to be kind, cariñoso, loving to them, and trying to really be a voice for them. So I think tonight we will be that voice for them. Let me just briefly mention a little bit about Lucy, Dr. Takagi. She's licensed in the state of New Jersey and in New York. Again, we mentioned that she graduated from the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology in 2006. She works clinically with inner city, ethnically, financially, and culturally diverse populations, adults, child victims of sexual abuse. We've had shows before about sexual abuse, and I'll probably be recycling something in the near future in the area of sexual abuse. She works with a certain number of adult immigrants in Newark, New Jersey. She worked as a forensic evaluator. Just to be clear, a forensic evaluator doesn't mean that you're dealing necessarily with bodies and corpses, and you tend to think of the morgue. No. Forensic is a special branch of psychology that's dealing with the interface of psychology, mental health, and the law. So this is where the forensic comes in. It's a marriage of psychology, the science of psychology, the knowledge that we have of psychology, and the law. She's done quite a bit. I mean, I've had guests who've had very, very long resumes, some actually longer than my own. Yours is getting there. She's also, you teach, right? I think you teach. You're a clinical specialist at Robert D. McCormick Center for Child Advocacy and Policy at Montclair State University. I think I made a presentation at Montclair also, I don't remember, but I may have done that from the Latino Psychological Association of New Jersey.
Yes,
I believe that I did something there. So she has many, many memberships. So without further ado, welcome. And why don't you say a few words about you and greet everybody. And I know you speak, you're brasileira, right? Did I say it correctly?
Yeah, brasileira.
I know as senhoras falam muito bem. That I know.
Oh, that's very good.
So why don't you say a few things about yourself and, greet everybody.
Well,
I know you speak a little bit of Spanish too.
Well, first and foremost, I would just like to thank the Tribuna TV for opening the space for this program on this topic because it's such an important topic. I would like to thank Oscar for helping me with Skype, and I do hope that Skype works until the end of the program without a problem. And I especially would like to thank you, Roy, Dr. Roy Aranda, who is not only a renowned immigration lawyer, but also a leader in the psychology field, especially in the tri-state area. Immigration is a crucially important topic at this point in the United States history. Of course, the limit of time that we're going to have here, we're only going to be able to scratch the surface of the iceberg. But I do hope that you will use this as a motivating tool to kind of bring the topic up with your families, with your friends, with your professional associations, with your communities, and to learn more about all the questions that you may have, but it may not have been answered through this presentation. Of course, this presentation I'm presenting as a clinical psychologist, as Dr. Aranda said, as a woman, as a representative of the New Jersey Psychological Association, and also as an immigrant myself. As he said, I'm from Brazil. Now, I made two promises. One was going to be that I would say something in Portuguese, so I'll try to be brief, and I'll try to say in Spanish on behalf of your viewers. Eu gostaria de agradecer a TV Tribuna e principalmente ao Dr. Roy Aranda, que não é somente um advogado de imigração, mas é um líder dentro do campo da psicologia americana. É uma honra estar aqui falando de um tópico tão importante nos Estados Unidos nesse momento histórico, mas eu gostaria de falar com os telespectadores que nós apenas vamos cobrir o topo do iceberg. E eu espero que isso seja um começo que estimule vocês a procurar mais informações, a trazer esse tópico para discussão com as suas famílias, com os seus amigos, com as suas comunidades. Eu vou apresentar aqui sobre minha perspectiva sendo presidente eleita da Associação de Psicologia de Nova Jersey, e também como mulher, e também como imigrante e psicóloga clínica trabalhando com imigrantes. Muito obrigada. Now in Spanish. God help me. Em primeiro lugar, gostaria de pedir desculpas por meu portunhol muito errado. Mas em segundo lugar, gostaria de agradecer à TV Tribuna por o honor de ter-me como invitada hoje. E também gostaria de agradecer a Dr. Roy Aranda, que não é somente um advogado de imigração, mas que também é um líder dentro do campo de psicologia americana. A imigração é um tema de muita importância nos Estados Unidos nesse momento histórico, pero que infelizmente só podemos cobrir alguns pontos aqui nesta apresentação. E, obviamente, essa discussão será, desde minha perspectiva como mulher, como representante da Associação de Psicologia de Nova Jersey, e também como imigrante e como psicóloga clínica que trabalha com imigrantes. Eu espero que isso seja um começo para você e que motive os espectadores a apresentar o tema às suas famílias, amigos e às suas comunidades.
So I understood the Spanish a little bit better than the Portuguese. I have to admit, I studied Portuguese for a year. So, I mean, I had a little bit of background, but I'm aware that Portuguese from Portugal and Portuguese from Brazil is like very, very different. I mean, I don't know if you understand one another, but I know that the accents are different, that there's different. The Brazilian Portuguese, I always thought was a little bit softer, caressing the words a little bit more. I've always thought it sounded really, really lovely. I did want to correct one thing that you said for the viewers. I'm not an immigration lawyer. In fact, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm a psychologist. I happen to have a law degree, so I do have the JD, the Juris Doctorate. I did go to law school for 4 years. It was torture. I got very bored, when I hit 50 and I was like, beginning to develop midlife crisis. I said, this is boring. So I decided to study neuropsychology, which I did, and I studied neuropsychology for a couple of years, and I got a post-grad degree in neuropsych, and then I found myself getting bored again, especially when you're doing forensic work, and I said, wait a second. I taught psychology in the Lord Hofstra University, and I had a lot of students who were going to study law, and I remember, like, I'm teaching them, and I'm teaching them things about the law, and I decided, well, let me study the law, and I did. And to my credit, I spent 4 years studying, and I graduated, so I do have a law degree from 2007. So 1 year after you graduated, I graduated from law school. So I do have the law degree, but I'm not an attorney. So just like in psychology, you have to be licensed and you have to go for licensure and be certified by the state. I never did that, so I'm not practicing as an attorney.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to make that clear, because I don't need to get any more referrals from people saying, what can I do? So I'll refer you to a lawyer if you need a lawyer. But the nice marriage of psychology and the law, as I was saying before, I have found has been very useful for my profession, and especially in dealing with immigration, because when you're dealing with, and we're going to mention a little bit of about asylum and hardships and U visas and VAWA, there are special requirements that have to be met, and unfortunately, if you do not have that knowledge and you lack that experience, and you only depend on the attorney to do it, and the attorney's only depending on the psychologist to give you some sort of a summary of what the psychological makeup is of the person, you're really not communicating all that effectively. And to me, it's always been teamwork. The teamwork is the attorney, the psychologist, and the client. All three sort of have to be interconnected. Otherwise, you're going to have a failure somewhere along the road. So I did want to just put that out there. And psychology is fine with me. I'm licensed since 1983, so I go back a long ways. So without further ado, as I've done on other shows, we usually start by talking about the nature of the problem. So I really wanted to do that with statistics, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about what it is that prompts immigrants to come here, what it is that keeps them here, and then what are some of the effects. How are they being affected? What sort of traumatic experiences are children faced with right now, their families faced with right now, and what are the kinds of things that psychologists can do, and then ultimately towards the end of the show, some recommendations that we hopefully can make to the viewers so that they have some plausible thoughts and ideas of what they might be able to do if they do have questions or if they see somebody in need, and not just stand hopelessly idle, not doing anything. I think passivity modernly is really not a good way to approach any sort of a problem. Okay, so Oscar, por favor, el primer slide. I mix languages back and forth. You won't hear me say it though in Portuguese, Lucy. So
that's wonderful.
Okay.
I think it's wonderful that you mix Spanish and English in the program.
So, okay, so. I see part of it. I don't know if you can get rid of, there we go. Okay. All righty. So, Lucy, you're in the right-hand corner, which is like really great. So these are some statistics. I just wanted to bring to your attention, to the viewers' attention, the scope of what we're looking at. We have more than 95% of undocumented children have immigrated from what's known as the Northern Triangle. Guatemala, well, actually, it should be Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. Those are the countries that we're looking at. Guatemala is actually the one that has a border with Mexico. This is called the Northern Triangle. 84.3 million immigrants and U.S.-born children here are in the United States. Immigrants, 27% of the population, and 14% are in illegal status. So that means that they are undocumented. I hate the word illegal. It makes it sort of sound like they're bad, and sometimes
actually, I use unauthorized or undocumented.
Undocumented works for me because I think that the majority of undocumented immigrants in the United States are not committing crimes, so we need to dispel that myth, the myth of violence and the myth of criminal activity. Yes, we do get a lot of talk about MS-13, but the number of MS-13 gang members that are actually active in the United States, I think it's under 10,000. 10,000 may be a very high estimate. I'm sure it's probably less than that. And it's not like, we're dealing with a population of close to 11 million. Of immigrants who are here undocumented, and we certainly have a population now close to 55 million of Hispanics in the United States. We're definitely the majority minority, and give another 20, 25 years, and it's going to be huge. With the population, the Hispanic population in the United States right now is second largest in the entire world. And we're only behind. We're only behind at this point in time Mexico, and we'll probably be competing with Mexico in another 25 or so years. So we have approximately 44 to 46 percent that are documented and documented million. This is actually a lower estimate because it's higher. This is like 2017, but I looked at a census, and it took us higher, I think 54.5 or close to 55 million. And about 2.5 million passed through the immigration detention system, meaning crossing the border, and were detained. Not all of them are being detained, but this is certainly the ones that we're aware of because they were detained. So, Oscar, if you can put the second slide, I want to show the viewers why it is that despite all of the difficulties that immigrants are encountering modernly now in the United States, why is it that they choose to stay here? So, slide 2, please. Okay, so here, the top, why do immigrants stay? Well, they stay here because conditions here are far better than they are where they come from. They're coming to escape violence, extreme poverty, the maras, the criminal activity, the threats, murders, the femicide, the trading of children, sexual abuses, and also given that the state is unable to protect the children or their adults and parents who are being in some way victimized, and that's a basis for requesting asylum. One of the requirements, there are several categories for asylum, but one of the requirements is that there must be a credible fear, so that there must be something that the four corners come together and it's credible, the story that they tell you when they come here, and they repeat the same thing more or less over and over. It doesn't have to be identical, but the story seems to ring of truth, and that there's really nothing that the government, where they come from, can do to protect them. I have had, as an example, Salvadoran women, Honduran women who have been abused by cop husbands, or by husbands who have had friends that were mareros, and the mareros intimidate the police. So they can't go to the police because then the police won't help them. In the airports, train stations, mass transportation areas, they're posted there. So they see you coming and going. They know where you live. They look for you. If you're a young mother, they'll threaten not only you but your child. They do horrific things. And the fear is that if God forbid, there was a mandatory deportation, that the asylum request was not granted, relief was not given, and they are in fact, the person is in fact deported. The moment he or she, more she, but the moment she arrives,
Their target.
at her country, she's going to be spotted. She'll be picked up.
And become a target.
They'll ask for rentas. Rentas is like they'll charge, money, extortion. You're either going to give this number of lempiras or else we're killing you. They expect that the rich husband in the United States will be able to make the payments. So these are the kinds of things that they're looking at, and basically they're hoping for a better life here in the United States. You had something to add to that, Lucy?
Do you mind if I just add one piece
Sure.
of that I'm not sure if you're aware? I just came from the American Psychological Association conference in Chicago 2 weeks ago. And in there, one of the presentations was from 4 psychologists in Mexico, in 4 different towns. And they presented 4 separate studies. And one of the studies was actually addressing, this, not only the reasons for for the exodus of Mexico. And one thing that I had not heard is how the criminal organizations send messages to the community to generate this kind of terror. So people show up hung, people show up mutilated, people show up disemboweled in the community to basically generate this sense of terror. Murders of journalists and activists, murders of citizens who do not comply with organized crime.
So it's criminal. It's criminal terrorism. It's organized. Organized criminal terror. The MS-13 is very, very organized. Honduras has several maras, and of course, so does El Salvador. They're very intricate, very sharp, very sophisticated.
Right, but this is not in this triangle. It occurs in other countries too. I mean, it occurs in Brazil, it occurs in Mexico, right? And the rate of trauma, the rate of, one of the studies actually indicated from when the post-traumatic stress disorder scale was given to 1,000 teenagers, 50% of them could fulfill criteria for PTSD living in Mexico. So it is the kind of, you're absolutely right, the terrorism that occur and the constant anxiety, the nightmares, the sleep disorders, all of the issues that come with being chronically in a dangerous place. There's no rest. It's constantly feeling like it's going to be a threat. And also one of the things that I was not aware of was males in particular tend to become a target. So teenage boys, men, and their wives or their mothers are the ones basically pushing for, at least in Mexico, pushing for migration, because they want to be, as women, they feel like they need to protect their families, and especially their males in their family.
Well, I know the trip, Mexico's enormous. So when you're looking from Guatemala and then having to travel 1,000 or so miles across Mexico, and many of them are walking, during the daytime, sleeping wherever they can at night, or they're taking that proverbial luxury freight, and I'm saying luxury jokingly, facetiously, la bestia, where you have the prevalent mara there, the prevalent gang there, the Zetas. The Zetas that are there, and they'll shoot people off of the train. They'll also demand money You'll have little girls will be raped, people will be pushed, they fall under the train tracks. We're not aware of this. We don't see this. We don't get this,
right.
But some of those images are very, very horrific, and even
Absolutely.
when you
And the impunity of the system, right, which is what you were alluding to before.
Yeah.
It's how, in the United States, for the most part, we tend to rely on law enforcement. Not maybe with some variability, but, we tend to, law enforcement impunity and corruption is not so blatant as it is in some of these countries, unfortunately, because law enforcement there, even with best intentions, sometimes they also don't have the gunpowder or the arsenal to kind of fight these organized organizations.
Yeah, but there's also la mordida. There's this thing that they can be bought. There's a tremendous amount of fraudulent activities and pecking hierarchies and who's who on a hierarchy. Even the coyotes, the ones that are doing the accompanying them, they've been known to be abusive and demand extra money. And if the person runs out of money, they'll take a pound of flesh to boot.
And I've heard from clients, like even after they arrive in the U.S., the coyotes or the group that brings them here take pictures of their family, threaten them with, if they don't pay more, if they don't pay what they owe. So there's also
extortion.
that even leaving,
that's
it's not necessarily a solution.
So the previous slide actually had a photo, and it had a photo of a very poor neighborhood. So I chose that. Actually, Lucy, I think you provided that photo. It was just to show an image that represented what living situations look like. Can you put slide number 3? Slide 3. I'm trying to give you a more global picture, including and up to the El Paso shooting and the Mississippi ICE raids. So that's the house. That's the poverty. So slide 3. The next one, Oscar. That's again. Okay, so this was the El Paso shooting. I don't want to belabor it and really focus much more on it than to point out, here's a picture that shows you, some crosses and people that are there mourning. We heard in an interview, one young student actually exclaimed, "I feel like we're being hunted." And of course, we've since seen in the news, we've become aware that the assailant, that the mass shooter, actually targeted Hispanics, that he went to a Walmart targeting Hispanics, and that El Paso, which is right there by the border, is 83% Hispanic. And the Walmart that he traveled, what was it, like 8 or 9 hours to get there, because he didn't want to do it in his own neighborhood, but he went to where he thought he could get the greatest number of Hispanos, and that was in that Walmart in the El Paso area neighborhood. And this is a very heavily Mexican-American neighborhood where Mexicans, they're crossing the border. It's like a daily back and forth. People are used to this. There's a camaraderie there. Nobody's up in arms. People get along. And you can imagine the horrific impact that has had. But of course, it added to this having a bullseye on already a fragile population of people, namely your immigrants who are coming and trying to come to the United States. So the next slide, slide number 4.
Okay, wait.
This was, I believe, only 4 days after the shooting. I know that we had El Paso then Dayton, Ohio, the very next day, and I believe it was 3 or 4 days after that, that we had the largest ICE raids ever in the United States, in Mississippi, several locations targeting 7 food processing plants. About 680 were arrested. The numbers that I have, and I don't know how up to date it is presently, but approximately 300 had been released and a good 377 or more remained in custody. Now, that picture of that little girl, Magdalena Gomez Gregorio, when I saw that picture, I have to confess, I mean, I cried.
Yeah,
I had tears. I'm a very sentimental person to begin with, but tears came to my eyes. I looked at her and I heard her plight, and she was crying and sobbing and saying, you know, like, my dad didn't do anything. He's not a criminal. He said, I believe she said, U.S. government, please help, please do something. But it was for an 11-year-old. I mean, this little girl is very, very sharp. I give her an incredible amount of credit for so courageously stepping up. There were cameras all over the place. She's become a celebrity. I don't think that she wanted celebrity status this way. But she is like my idol right now. I idolize this little girl, and that's why I wanted to put her photo there. She's the Magdalena Gomez, and I did want to bring to the attention of the viewers, I'm sure you're all aware of it, that many students were absent from school the very next day. I'm not entirely sure how that's happening now. The school system, obviously, in Mississippi is different than it is here. I know that in charter schools and in some schools in New York, my neck of the woods, schools are already starting end of August. It looked like they started pretty early over there in Mississippi. And it's not like the New York City public schools that start usually the Tuesday or Wednesday after Labor Day. So you can imagine adding to the horrific nightmare of perception of being targeted because you're Hispanic following the mass shooting. But then on the first day of school, going home and your parents not there, or being in school and nobody's there to pick you up, and this is your first day of school. This is how you're starting the first day of school for your child. This is the memory this child is going to have of the first day of school.
Which leads to a lot of school phobia for children, especially young children. And if they're very young, one of the consequences is really lack of understanding, because oftentimes either the people, the adults who remain with them, do not necessarily have an understanding because they're too young of how to explain what's happening. So they may say, like, your parent doesn't have papers, and for a very young child, that doesn't necessarily capture what that means.
But they're also in a state of panic themselves, because you don't know exactly what their legal status is either.
Exactly.
So for many of them, I know that CNN, through its local affiliate in Mississippi, interviewed Juana, who is Magdalena's mother, and the mother didn't want to go into too much detail because she was afraid of people coming to look for her, try to find her, and things like that. So this is very real. This is very real.
Yes.
And it's a shame. Ponme el próximo slide number 5. I want to show a couple of statements that some of my patients made. And then, Lucy, I'd like you to share what some of your patients have been saying. But here, this immediately after the ICE raids. My patients were telling me, I have a very active, busy practice with many of Hispanos. A good number of them are here lawfully. The majority are here lawfully. They have permission to be here. I do a lot of immigration-related forensic evaluations for asylums, for hardships, sometimes a VAWA, and occasionally U visas. But the bulk of my Latino patients are here lawfully. But they're afraid to go out. They're afraid to go to malls. They're afraid to take their children out. They're afraid ICE raids, but they're also afraid of being targeted. They're afraid that they'll be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they'll get shot. And you know that after the incident in El Paso, we've had several arrests that were made because of credible vigilance on social media by law enforcement. So we had a 15-year-old student. We had another person targeting a Hispanic woman, threatening to kill her and Hispanos. So we're seeing this. We're seeing these kinds of threats, and I am so worried and troubled that we're a hop and a skip away from another tragedy, and I think we really need to be on the lookout and be aware of this, and not just bury our heads in the sand and pretend it's not going to happen, or that it couldn't happen. It has happened, and it's happened often enough. I had another patient of mine said that he was afraid something could happen like what happened to my Mexican compadres. He said it to me in Spanish, but he's from Mexico, and he specifically said, mis compadres mexicanos. He's afraid something else will happen. I had an Uber driver from the Middle East who said that he was afraid that he would be the victim of a passenger. In the news not too long ago, there was a story of a young driver who had been killed, and he was from the Middle East, a pleasant-looking, innocent cab driver that was killed. And I'm reasonably sure that ethnicity or appearance had something to do with it. You know, the racism, the hatred had something to do there. So I didn't want to belabor and go through the list of patients, but I had so many of my patients who were talking about this. Lucy, I'm sure you've had some reactions from your own patients.
Yes. This terror not only for Hispanic patients, but also for Portuguese-speaking patients and for other immigrants who are still undocumented, who are in the process of getting documented. There is a huge sense of terror that people are anxious, they are afraid.
Yeah, it's not just Hispano. I mean, you have people of Jewish faith, of Muslim faith. We have African. We have people that are coming from Europe and Asia by the drove. So it's not just Los Hispanos. And obviously this is a TV show that, La Tribuna, and my type of work I do is geared more towards Hispanos, but I've done evaluations with people from Haiti and other countries as well.
Correct, and that's the irony of it, right? Because, I don't know where I read that, 2/3 of immigrants in the United States are not necessarily from the southern border, and they're not necessarily undocumented because they jumped the border. They are 2/3 of the immigrants are actually undocumented because their visa expired and they remain in the country. But this 2/3 are not necessarily being targeted, but they compose the large majority of immigrants who are also out of status.
But we've seen people targeted just by the color of their skin, or by assumptions that were made that they are of a particular race or culture, and they're not. So people are jumping to conclusions just on the basis of appearance.
Right. So let's talk about stereotypes, and what I think is something that I don't think it has been addressed as effectively in the media, which is the dehumanization of these members who are undocumented at this point in history in the U.S. So even the language, we refer to them as aliens. We refer to them as criminals. We refer to them as illegals. That creates like a dehumanization aspect that kind of gets encoded in our memory, right? In our mind.
And that's the way of justifying taking the kinds of horrible measures. It's okay to do this because they are subhuman. And this is what we've seen throughout history with other races and other immigrants that have come to the United States. We've seen this.
Right.
We've seen this before.
Are we looking at the beginning, and I hope not, but one fear that I actually hold with all my patients, are we witnessing the beginning of ethnic cleansing? That's, I think, it's a question worth asking.
Well, it's being asked, and it's being asked. I want to look at the emotional devastation and the emotional impact to children and families. So, Oscar, slide number 6, please. Storming outside. Okay, so here, in no particular order of, I'm not trying to put this in any sort of hierarchical order, nor do I want to say that this is a list that encompasses and includes everything.
Everything.
I think it's a good summary of some of the symptoms that children experience. I do want to caution viewers, or at least try to educate them that we have children who are developmental milestones. Ages are very important. So a child, like age 4 or 5 is different than an 8 or 9. Magdalena is 11. We have preteens, teens. So how they perceive things, how they view things, how they react emotionally, behaviorally will vary according to different ages. So this is sort of a bit generic. They're going to have a lot of anxiety, separation. They're going to be attached to the hip of a parent if they have one, if they weren't separated. They'll have symptoms of depression, changes in appetite, changes in sleep. They don't want to sleep. They don't sleep well. They have nightmares. There'll be anxiety even after they are reunited. Why? Because they've witnessed separation. They feel insecure. They're not protected. They're not safe. Anything can happen to them any moment.
Exactly. Exactly. And in addition to just anxiety, one of the, aside from Madalena's picture that I reacted similarly to you, there is another picture in a video of this mother who actually met this very young child, I think 5 or 6, during reunification. She was reunited with the child after the child being separated for a few months, and the child didn't recognize her.
No, I remember that.
You look at the child.
It was so sad. It was so sad.
Yes.
The child also, if the child does recognize the child could be angry. Why did you leave me? Get all upset. You did this to me. Blaming.
Exactly.
So that causes a serious problem. Children who are detained for longer periods of time are more likely to develop some sort of a psychiatric disorder. And keep in mind that we were already talking about children and of course adults already traumatized, not only traumatized in the country of origin that led to their wanting to flee in the first place. They're fleeing already because of trauma. On the way, they're traumatized. At the border, they're traumatized. So with lengthier detentions, the trauma is only going to get worse and worse and worse.
Right.
And people who think, well, they're children, it's not such a big deal, it'll go away with time. I hate to say this, but PTSD and some of these kinds of disorders may very well endure a lifetime. Well, we're having a wonderful ice rain. I don't know if you hear. We're in the middle of a thunderstorm right here. It's like I guess there's some anger at what's going on. It's being reflected. It's being reflected in the weather. The weather is angry at what's taking place.
That's right. I also would like to add, especially teenagers, even teenagers who are documented or who are citizens, teenagers who are born in the U.S., whose 1 or 2 parents are immigrants. They are also being targeted in their school environment, with their peer groups. They're being sources of bullying because they're being perceived also as being criminals, even though they were born in the U.S. So that's kind of the collateral effect of all of this, that it's not just the immigrants who are suffering, but it's also the Americans.
Viewers, I have told you that every Thursday when I do my show, we have rain. Oh, my God.
Well,
so,
I think the skies are angry.
I believe so. I think there's a lot of symbols that we're seeing. Along with the children, because it's hardly just the children who are suffering. Oscar, can you please put 7? Hopefully we'll remain with power for a while. Number 7, please.
And on number 7, you talk about health consequences. And I think that's one piece that also is very relevant, because we now have the adverse childhood experiences studies informing us that, trauma that occurs early on in life has a long-lasting effect in health, in medical health. So there are associations with diseases like diabetes, like cardiac problems, with cancer, that result from these traumatic experiences early on in childhood. So we know that the American Pediatric Organization issued a wonderful statement, and so did the American Psychological Association, regarding these initiatives regarding immigration and the family separation problem. Because, literally, these families are being more traumatized after they cross the border than before they arrive, pretty much. And that's
you have
public health.
It's
problem.
almost like what you could look at in the field of psychology. We have a condition that's known as complex PTSD, victim of child abuse, domestic violence, over and over and over repeated. Yes. So I see this as PTSD on top of PTSD. PTSD where you came from, PTSD along the way, PTSD crossing the border, PTSD in detention, and PTSD once released in the country, and the PTSD connected with fear of deportation.
Correct.
Okay, we have, once you're here, you're facing deportation. You come here facing deportation. That's a reality. Look at the families.
You have to be invisible, and you have to be voiceless.
Well, that's what I wrote here. I wrote an article about living in the shadows, which is why I use that in this particular slide. But the typical activities of daily living are disrupted. Fragmentation of the family. There may be a parent may not be there. There'll be separations of people. Right. Somebody already was removed, or is in detained, or in jail. Frequent relocations. They have to move from one place to another. Financial difficulties. They don't have money. They're not making the money, and those who stay here often are victimized themselves. They're the victims of employers who pay them substandard wages, don't give them benefits, couldn't care less if anything happened to them, lie to them. And also threaten to have them deported if they don't comply with their requests. So we have the health consequences, as you were mentioning, because they don't have insurance. So going to a house, they won't go. They won't go to dentists. They won't go to doctors. Limited opportunities. They're not going to go to social services seeking help because they won't qualify for it. They are living in fear, and they're living and hiding in the shadows. This is the life of many of these people.
So what can we do about it?
That's the next slide. I'm glad you raised that question. Specifically, what can psychologists do, since we are psychologists? So, Lucy, you've done forensic evaluations. Obviously, these are some of the things that we do. Some of us do these evaluations. To the viewers who may either themselves or have family members or know people who are in need of some sort of an immigration-related evaluation, don't assume that anybody is qualified to do it just because they have a certain degree, or they say, I am a mental health professional, or I'm this, or I'm that. And I'm not in any way trying to denigrate any profession. We're having many, many qualified professionals who are qualified to do it, but that's the key word, qualified. Somebody has to have an idea and knowledge of what they're doing. So the forensic evaluation has to be done by a person who's qualified, who knows what he or she is doing. We've mentioned the asylum hardship. I know I've talked about it on different shows. I won't get into it too much, other than to say that it means how will the U.S. citizen or lawful resident be affected by the removal of a spouse who is undocumented. What would be the impact? If you have a mother who has 3 children, as I often see, and one child may have medical problems, asthma or something else. The mother's not working because the children are young, so she is a homemaker. The undocumented father is the only means of support, and he's removed. Where's your hardship? What is going to become of this woman and her children? That's what I'm talking about, the hardship. VAWA, the violence against women, it's not just women, it's also applicable to men. These are people who had viable marriages. It wasn't a sham marriage, it was a legitimate marriage, but they were subjected to extreme emotional, physical, psychological abuse. U visa is a undocumented immigrant who was the victim of a crime, and by cooperating with the United States law enforcement, they become eligible for a residence after 2 years if they're cooperating with the government. And a T visa is similar, but it's for trafficking. We and here, certainly not just forensic psychologists, but psychologists and other mental health professionals, they provide psychotherapy. Those who are familiar with the field are in a position of providing resources for immigrants and their families. We were talking about correcting the erroneous beliefs, the myth that the immigrant is violent, the myth that the immigrant's lazy, the myth that the immigrant's trying to take over jobs, the myth that the immigrant's taking over resources. These are some stereotypes that are unfortunate, and we're in a position of trying to correct those, with not only with our patients, but with social media and with news reports and in our reports and when we do conferences and presentations and shows like this to try to educate the public.
Right.
We are familiar with community resources. There are
legal
many
services resources.
There are many that provide help.
I want to add something to what you told about to the viewers about evaluations, because oftentimes I have people calling me for psychotherapy, believing that if they come to psychotherapy, I can actually do an evaluation, can write a report to them. So usually it's a very good thing to screen right in the beginning, to be able to, because we as psychologists, because of our ethics and because of our state regulations, we cannot be both a psychotherapist for a client and a forensic evaluator for the same client. So it's usually very...
Yeah, it's called a dual relationship that psychologists are familiar with that. But you don't really want to mix one thing with the other. Now, the American Psychological Association, they put a statement out yesterday that I took the liberty of editing some of it, and I did respond to your statement. But the APA, and this makes a lot of sense to me, they recommend expanded and improved mental health services for newly arriving immigrants. Hello, wake up! Doesn't that make sense? At the border, and this is really precious. Also to alleviate the stress for border agents. These are human beings. Exactly. They're not all mean. They're human beings who are trying to do their job, and they're overwhelmed with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds on any given day, and it's crazy. So they are under a lot of stress, and I think it makes a lot of sense for them, the border agents and at detention center, to have their mental health needs recognized and to have some service available for them with confidentiality, so they're not singled out. They don't want to be singled out, and I respect that. I think that makes a lot of sense. It has to be done privately with confidence. The APA also recommends, APA, by the way, is American Psychological Association, the parent of all of the state psychological associations. They recommend that psychologists be placed in detention centers to help ameliorate the crisis. This sounds like a very tall order because you've got to define what the crisis is. But the idea of having them in detention centers makes a lot of sense and ties in with the one just above that. Lucy, as we're approaching the end of our program, I did want to ask you if you had some thoughts about what viewers can take away from this, and recognizing that they're not going to be the ones necessarily performing the evaluations. What message can we give viewers that would be helpful for them? What do you think would be helpful for viewers to take away?
Well, if you are under stress, if you would like to talk to someone about whether, either about your immigration status or about the psychological issues that about what's going on in the country, reach out, call your state psychological association.
You're in New Jersey, so it's New Jersey Psychological Association. I'm in New York State Psychological Association, APA, American Psychological Association. A quick Google search will get you to these. You have many other professional agencies, Red Cross, Human Rights First, Raíces in Texas. We have many organizations that are there to help immigrants. There's many attorneys that offer low bono, meaning low rate, or pro bono, no charge. Many universities also have, as part of their training programs, they have clinics that work with undocumenteds, and I think that that's something for you to be aware of.
Exactly.
I think the viewers need to have an eye on some of the hateful things that are being said. If not to the viewer, maybe to the viewer's neighbor, or to children in school who come home crying because they were bullied because they look different, act different, talk differently, or come from one of these crazy countries. That's being denigrated. You can't. You have to stand up. You see something, say something. Meaning, be a little bit willing to go the extra mile, the extra walk, the extra few steps that it takes to try to help and reach out. Recognize when somebody's hurting. Suggest seeking professional help. Religious organizations. Go to the religious organizations. The community has a lot of resources that you can come together and depend on them. Cops are not all bad guys or women.
Exactly.
They're not all the enemy. Many are there. They don't want you to be the victim of a crime. But on the other hand, if you're here and you are not documented, even if you are, don't break the law. I mean, don't commit a crime. Don't have a DWI. Don't commit a robbery. Don't steal something. You're putting yourself in harm's way. Obviously, if you're undocumented, more so. I also think it's very important for people who are undocumented to have a safety plan. You have to have some idea of who to contact if mommy doesn't come home or daddy doesn't come home. Where do you have resources? Do you have money in the bank? Who do you call? Do you have an uncle? Do you have an aunt? Who's there to help you?
Who are the lawyers that the spouse or the family member who stays home can contact? Because a lot of times when the detention occurs, the person who is being detained is afraid of calling anyone because they don't want to flag the other person. So, having a plan with your family, having in a written plan, I actually created for my patients.
Well, that's very good.
Plan of what to do with all of the resources in my community that they can actually, know that the resources are there. But it's up to them to.
And there are many agencies, many attorney agencies that provide little palm cards, like what to do if you are in fact stopped by ICE. We have to come to an end.
Yes.
Lucy, did you want to say goodbye to everybody?
I would like to say thank you to everyone, for the viewers, and I would briefly like to read something that I think is very relevant when we talk about the dehumanization of the immigrant that's going on right now. The quote says, "Migrants and refugees are not pawns on the chessboard of humanity. They are children, women, and men who leave or are forced to leave their homes for various reasons, who share legitimate desire for knowing and having, but above all, for being more." This is Pope Francis, and I think it's very relevant.
That's beautiful. Lucy, thank you so much for being here. I did want to tell my viewers that this topic is so important to me personally. And I become so emotional over it that I decided to go ahead and organize a fundraiser on November 9th. I wanted to share that with the viewers. So, Oscar, if you could put that last slide up, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a fundraiser. I think I may have sent it to you also, Lucy.
No.
The fundraiser that I'm organizing, and I'm actually calling it, it's a little small, I'm calling it Save the Children, Reuniting Children and Families. It's November 7th, Saturday at Verdi's. Obviously, it's here in Long Island. But there's no, I'm not charging anybody who's able to come. It's a free dinner, entertainment, open bar. And I'm so grateful to little Magdalena. I decided to put her photo there. And the funds that are collected will be going to social service agencies that deal with the children and families that are the victims of separation. So that said, the show has been recorded on YouTube. It will be available tomorrow on Tribuna TV, Vimeo, and Facebook. So thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you.
You're a sweetheart. You speak Brazilian so well. I'm impressed. You speak Spanish pretty good, too. Thank you so much. I know Skype is a little bit difficult. Oscar, you did a wonderful job.
Yes,
it looks really, really good. And I want to thank all the viewers for joining us. And I hope you'll be here next week when I have Captain Terrence Ravella as my guest for the 9/11 show. So, Oscar, buenas noches a todos. Be safe. I have to worry about lightning and thunder and who knows what. But everybody else, be safe. I know that in California we have fires. I hope that everybody's okay. I hope that there's no more earthquakes. And I really hope that we don't have this bad weather. And let's try to solve these kinds of problems. Let's live really in a United States, a country of love, compassion, and support for one another. Let's try to do that. Let's be neighborly. So, buenas noches a todos. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Roy.